Hey, we're back for another episode of the Tripping Point podcast. And this is the show where we talk about plans that didn't survive contact with reality. And they might have looked good on paper, but sometimes they're just doomed from the start. But in every case, at some point, it went sideways hard. And we want to talk about what we learned from those experiences. Today, with me, I've got Mike Dickerson with Tacitus Group, and he's got a very interesting resume and doing some really neat things in his domain. So I'll let you introduce yourself, and we'll get into it.
Thanks, Josh. I'm very happy to be here on the podcast. So like Josh said, I'm Mike Dickerson. I'm the founder and CEO of the Tacitus Group. We provide fractional back office executive support for government contractors. Our staff is made up of people who have been chiefs of staff and staff directors, the equivalent to a chief operating officer in the United States intelligence community and Department of Defense, which is where my background is. I got my start as a web designer back in 2000, turn of the century, and was building websites for a small IT company in Northern Virginia where I currently live. Because it was pre 9/11, there wasn't a lot of money that was being funneled towards national security. 9/11 happened, and then the US government started getting contractors involved on rebuilding what was taken apart after the Cold War ended. And so I eventually wound up at Booz Allen Hamilton, where I stayed for almost 13 years. And I helped stand up the National Counterterrorism Center as the Office of the Director of National Intelligence was being created. OD&I was established after 9/11 to coordinate the agencies within the intelligence community to help get rid of the stovepipes and information gaps that led to the attacks of 9/11. And I'll get into why that matters in a second when I talk about something that broke as we were trying to figure out how OD&I could lead the intelligence community. After 12 years at Booz Allen, where I was a program manager for multi-$100 million task orders, eventually I joined the government in 2016, where I've had a series of fascinating jobs. And much like my time as a consultant with Booz, I didn't follow a single path with my government career. So I started off as a strategic mission manager, creating global strategies where senior executives could lead and orchestrate resources for collection and analysis and counterintelligence and operations in different geographic AORs. Did that for about a year and a half. And then I moved to enterprise IT. Again, there's no clear path. And enterprise IT is where my story will come in a minute, where I was a leader in a group that was responsible for providing the user voice to multi-agency wide IT architecture, which was a fascinating experience.
Now, so before you pivot into the story you have, quick, what does stovepiping mean?
So pre 9/11, different intelligence agencies would collect information from different sources and they would basically hoard it. So if you visualize physical stovepipes, CIA would have information from their sources about a thing. FBI would have information. NSA would have information, but they weren't sharing it. They were literally stuck in these stovepipes and these metaphorical tubes of information.
Silos, right? I mean, is that the word
yes.
we use now? Silos? Okay, got it.
That's a good modern term. And so what the 9/11 Commission determined was these silos of information made it so that no one could connect the dots. FBI knew part of it, CIA knew part of it, and had someone been there to say A and B equals C, the 9/11 Commission said this could have been prevented. And so that's why the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 was passed to create that oversight and integration body.
Okay. Hard to believe that wasn't happening before. Hard to believe that there was no information sharing from one agency to another, but I mean, I believe it. It's just, it seems like logical sense would say you would really want to make sure everybody knew everything, being on the same team, but here we are. So, okay, let's make your transition. So tell us, you mentioned it a minute ago. The only thing I remember is IT, but tell us about the role you had and what happened. What give us the tripping point event here?
Happy to. So OD&I, Director of National Intelligence, was created to integrate the 18 agencies of the intelligence community. And this builds up to the story. Within the intelligence community, most of the agencies are in the Department of Defense. CIA is independent. They're not in the department. And then there are smaller ones outside of the Department of Defense. Energy, state, DEA, FBI, they have intelligence parts too. But because of just the organic growth of federal IT infrastructure over 50 years, they had all developed their own systems. They'd all developed their own ways of communicating within each other and between each other, and had different ways of protecting their information. And the most robust was CIA, NSA, because of the types of information they collected. And these were physically independent architectures that didn't talk to each other in a way that was conducive, which again led to the siloing issue we just talked about. So OD&I was created to integrate. And one of the ways that it was trying to do that was through a program called the Intelligence Community Information Technology Enterprise, or ICITE. This was a creation in 2012 by Jim Clapper when he was Director of National Intelligence. Interesting fact, he was also a Booz Allen principal for a few minutes before he went back into government. So
Okay.
the joke when I was at Booz Allen was the initials BAH stands for Bin and Agency Hotshot, because they would just come in and out the government. And so Jim Clapper said, from a integration standpoint, this is important. And he saw the sequestration debate of the 2010s as a way to drive this forward, because the government needed to reduce spending. And there were bills in place that was actively reducing spending. And so sequestration was the hammer that the DNI wanted to use to force the agencies in the intelligence community to build an infrastructure that was single desktop, single pipes, single security architecture. My job as the acting chief of the Mission Capabilities Group was to provide the user voice to the 18 CIOs that were building this infrastructure across the community. So we were responsible for making sure that CIOs weren't building something because it was cool, but that it was actually responsive to the needs of people who were out in the field doing collection, doing operations, and doing analysis. We created a mission strategy for ICITE, and that served as the official voice to the CIOs building this out. And
so real quick, let me just pause you there. So just so we get a little bit, because again, us civilians don't speak government agency real well. I don't anyway. But what's you talk about chief? What's the sort of, what would you say the corporate
yes,
equivalent of chief is? Or is it literally chief of staff? Or not in this case, right?
No, that's a fair question. I would say the corporate equivalent would be a director. So,
okay, so
yeah.
C-suite, is it VP then director, or would you say that it's more right directly under the C-suite?
So in this case, if the director of national intelligence is the CEO, then the deputy director that I reported to would be an executive VP. And then within that large block, there would be different divisions led by an assistant director, which is a vice president equivalent. And then below that would be these groups, which is where I'm living at this point in the story, and that would be the director.
Okay, got it. And then again, to translate from government to civilian, the agencies, business units almost were talking to each other, but this one was using, I'm going to use the wrong terms here, but bear with me. This one was on Linux, and this was on Windows, and this was on, Apple. And so they're trying to communicate with each other according to the good idea in 2004 of, hey, we should talk about what we know. But that communication was not great because the tools to talk to with each other were not the same tools, not even close. And you were trying to line up to getting them. I mean, today's version API calls, right? Like trying to get push and pulls of data to happen seamlessly. Is that a fair oversimplification probably of what your role was as chief there?
It's fair, and to add an extra layer to that, there's also the incredibly onerous security protocols that are associated with working in a classified environment.
Okay, very secure at the same time, like not just push pull data, like make sure no one can ever get in the middle of that transaction.
Exactly. And a
Got it.
lot of
Okay.
these systems, by design, as part of their security protocols, they're air gapped. There's no physical connection between them. And so even if you wanted to talk to a different network, the ability wasn't physically there.
Meaning one wire from this computer to between this computer and that computer. Sorry, and I'm trying to just dumb it down so non-technical Josh and our audience can understand. Um, I mean, we get it today, right? Because we don't do that much at all. Maybe in 2004, that was the whole idea of cloud and passing things through the internet or some other connection like that wasn't. It was still giant servers connected to each other. Okay, got it.
It was. And I think a good analogy is I have an Android, my wife has an iPhone, and the ability of those two devices to text each other is second nature now. But that really wasn't a thing that existed in any kind of usable way when we're trying to build this new IT infrastructure 20 years ago.
Well, even today, if I try to send a photo to from an Apple to an Android, half the time it fails and I have to send it as text message. Now we're getting really into the weeds, but it is definitely it's a great analogy for, hey, there's challenges with passing data even today from one smartphone to another. Imagine the systems and the data and the security, like I don't care. Well, I do care who sees my messages, but I imagine the security involved in trying to keep my messages secure is minuscule compared to government intelligence. Okay,
It is.
got the landscape now. Thank you for that.
Of course. So the ODNI, the agency, one of their authorities is the ability to convene, to bring everyone to the same room to have a conversation. And so the CIO for the 18, for the intelligence community, got all of their peer CIOs together and tried to launch iSight. And that's a very oversimplification of it. This was a big congressional push and the White House was behind it. But the reason why this mattered is the ODNI doesn't own any of the infrastructure. It can convene, it can control, it can direct, but it can't force it. And that was a result of the creation of the agency after 9/11, because the politics of Washington, D.C., the position itself was not given the authority that it actually needed to do the job. And so by sheer force of will, were people actually brought together and tacitly, pun intended, agreed to move this forward.
Okay, so as government does, they set big goals, but then there's lots of obstacles in the way.
There are, and that's where this starts to fall apart. So the biggest things that needed to happen was a single desktop environment, which was the dream of Jim Clapper, that an intelligence officer could go to any agency in the Washington, D.C. area or around the world, log in with their credentials, and their home desktop would pop up. Just like when you log into your Gmail at a random computer or a new laptop, it's there. That didn't exist. But because he didn't own the infrastructure, he had to get the CIA and the NSA, which were the owners of the biggest pieces of the network, to agree. And the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, owns the pipes that everything rides on. And so those three agencies had to get together and agree to lower their security standards to the lowest common denominator, to open up their infrastructure, and to work on behalf of the other 17 that wasn't them for the betterment of the community. So you can imagine the kind of force of will this would take.
Well, the phrase "get together and agree" doesn't bring up images of Washington D.C. readily. Let's just
Especially nowadays.
Especially nowadays. I mean, obviously, we're thinking Republican, Democrat, and sort of Congress. But I mean, is the Are these agencies the same way? Do they not play together well because they're competing for dollars, or?
They're competing for dollars. They're competing for a seat at the table. And what is probably useful for your listeners to understand is up until the creation of the Director of National Intelligence, the CIA and the CIA director ran the intelligence community in such a way that he was the first among equals. He didn't have a lot of statutory authority, but he was the person who was briefing the president. He was the person who was proposing the budget. When the DNI was created, that access went away, and the head of CIA just ran CIA at that point. And so there was a bit of, and there still is, a bit of bad blood. And Jim Clapper, the part of the reason why this even got off the ground was he had famously, he'll say in every speech that he gave, had 50 years of experience in the intelligence community as a Marine, as an Air Force officer. He'd run multiple agencies, and he knew everyone in charge. And he had the ear of President Obama. So that helped a lot. But CIA's biggest thing, and the thing that they still are responsible for, is the President's Daily Brief, the PDB. It is the most sensitive intelligence that's delivered to the president every day. And because of that, their system and their network is the most secure, and it's the most hardened against penetration and against people trying to get into it. But they were being asked in this moment to lower the standards, to basically be part of the group. NSA felt that their information, because of how they collected it through listening and technical intelligence, was just as sensitive. And DIA didn't have the money. So they had to ask for the money to build out the infrastructure. And so what this led to was a typical Washington, D.C. thing where people would just start to slow roll, and they would take time and say, we need to study the problem. We need to do some more research. We need to get more information. And eventually ICE died because the work ahead of time before it was rolled out wasn't done properly. There was no pre-agreement behind the scenes to say, when this launches, you will be behind it, and here's how we're going to help you out. Just like if you're a lawyer in court, you never ask a question you don't already know the answer to. You don't want to be surprised when you have a witness on the stand. And it was the same thing here. This mattered for me because I had spent almost 3 years working to provide the mission voice to this group trying to build this out. And it just fizzled away in a matter of a few months.
Okay, so the theme of these podcasts, and I think we're running along the same lines, is when strategy is created without the ground truth, right? I think the analogy of the attorneys is really good, because they would never bring up something they didn't know was fact in the courtroom. I've known some attorneys that might. So maybe that's not the best analogy, but is that essentially what happened here? Is that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that the full picture of what had to happen and the understanding of those that were expected to execute on the plan, that wasn't all included when someone said, okay, go. Is that fair?
It's fair. I don't know if it was a lack of knowledge or if it was doublespeak, but the work that needed to get done to get the agreements ahead of time, it didn't seem like enough of them happened. There are some benefits to this whole thing. CIA and NSA, both, and this is part as it was breaking, both got different clouds built. CIA went with AWS, NSA went with a different provider, and we had a similar issue with the silos, but they were just two giant clouds as opposed to 18 different infrastructures. But the security issues were still there. And because something like this is so massive, and unlike the creation of ODNI, there was no metaphorical boom that forced everyone to agree. When the personalities changed, when Jim Clapper left being the Director of National Intelligence, IC ITE died with him, unfortunately. He didn't die. He's still alive.
What do you think that cost?
Billions. This was
Billions.
almost a decade-long project, and there are some benefits to it. The intelligence community now lives on a secure cloud, and clouds. The secure clouds are owned by the CIA and the NSA, so that is a benefit of it. But the dream of a single desktop, the dream of an integrated information infrastructure, it costs billions of dollars, and it's just not there, unfortunately. And until everyone has decided that they want to build more robust security protocols to go up to the highest common denominator, it's never going to be there. So where we are today is the intelligence community can email each other, we can pass files to each other, and there are websites that have a similar feature to Dropbox where you can put files in there. But if, as an ODNI officer, if I went to DIA, I can't log on. If an NSA officer is visiting the National Reconnaissance Office, they can't log on. So that's unfortunately where we are today, and it doesn't look like there's any appetite to try to bring that back.
So, yeah, that's painful. And the lesson learned, yeah, give me two things if you don't mind. What is the lesson that government learned? I'm not sure government learns lessons real well. Again, with not a great reputation for that at the moment, but
Right.
but what's the lesson learned from the government? Maybe there has been projects since then where we go, hey, hold on a minute. Remember ICE? You didn't have the budget, you didn't have the appetite, you didn't have the technical know-how, or that might be pretty close actually. And so this thing ain't going to work. And so when we try this new project, we got to make sure everybody has the money, the knowledge, and the motivation to do this. I mean, I don't know if that's happening. So that's is government better? As it's coming out of my mouth, it's like, it feels ludicrous, but maybe there's something behind the scenes you can encourage us with. That'd be great. A and B, what's the lesson for corporate America, or like our audience of business owners that might have a handful of employees, have a small business, or could have 2,000-3,000 or more employees, and they have strategy, they have a clear vision of what they want to do, and they need to make sure that that strategy succeeds in an environment. Remember, today's environment is 2 out of 3 strategic plans are never successfully executed. And that's the status quo today, right? That's acceptable. It's part of doing business. And that's frankly my vision is I'd like to not have that happen anymore. It feels unnecessary. And so lessons like yours are exactly what I think we need to learn, to apply the learnings from the losing billions of dollars on something that never materialized. So, okay, sorry, I gave you two things to talk about, and I'm really talking over. But yeah, what did government learn, and what can us as civilian business owners, what can we learn in trying to make strategy actually happen?
So the first part of what government learned, the overall, I think what they realized is the powers of the DNI are limited, but if used properly, they can be very useful. And this came to light in the form of a service of common concern, a SOC. And so I had mentioned a couple times that different agencies owned different pieces of infrastructure. They own clouds, they own pipes, those kind of things. So what the ODNI does have authority over is the budget, and they control how the budget is built and submitted to Congress for all these agencies every single year. The unclassified amount last year was $78 billion for intelligence funding. And what ODNI decided to do was to put a lot more carrots with a much smaller stick. Without getting into the nitty gritty of the federal appropriations process and how the IC budget is built, because I did live that life for 2 years and I was in the CFO shop. What ODNI did was they would go to an agency that had a service that was being positively used there that could be applicable to the rest of the intelligence community, and said, we will give you more money for the sole purpose, basically venture capital funding, to build this out for the rest of the community. The money for 5 years can only be used for this. But after 5 years, that additional inject becomes absorbed into your agency's top line, and you get that money for whatever you want to do. So cloud, for example, CIA, NSA had the biggest clouds. OD&I decided that the two secure clouds could be a service of common concern. So they gave those two agencies significant amounts of money to ensure that they were accessible by the rest of the community, especially the smaller agencies that didn't have a huge infrastructure like Department of Energy or Department of State on the intelligence piece. Additionally, the success begat success. And so as the rest of the community and the rest of Congress saw how these services of common concern were being used, it led to the idea that if OD&I wanted to lead the intelligence community in a way that was effective, and access to the president wasn't part of this conversation, the answer was money. And so over the past 7, 8, 9 years, there's been a major push to use OD&I funding and their control of the budget to drive the intelligence community in the direction that it wants to go using the power of the purse.
All in the same direction, right? Which is the key, right? From one spot. I got it. Okay. So you're taking them out of these silos a little bit.
And we're paying for it too.
Right.
And without going into classified numbers, if the OD&I wanted to just levy a 1% tax across the entire intelligence community using the number I just mentioned, that would be $7.8 billion. Or sorry, $780 million that could be used for these types of projects. So translate that to corporate America, translate that to business owners, people that are building organizations, much like myself. The lesson learned is you have to figure out what's motivating people, what's driving people. And it can't be an altruistic means. It can't be doing something for the greater good, because that's not the point of business and capitalism. It is a side effect and it is a benefit. But the idea is to succeed, to grow, to expand either your expertise or your actual business. And different companies, different organizations have different things that motivate them. As I'm working building Tacitus and I'm talking to different potential clients, some of them are motivated by the fact that their founder wants to continue to do delivery. Their founder started a tech-based company and they really enjoy doing the tech work and they don't want to do the back office work. Others are motivated by the fact that they want to get ready for an acquisition and they need to show a potential private equity firm that they have a really good shop in place. So it's not you going in saying, buy my stuff. It's figuring out where their pain points are and then saying, here's how I can help you. In the IC, it was, you want to build this thing within your agency. If we give you extra money for 5 years to do it, you can build it and you'll have the money and it's basically free to you. And that motivated them. So now, yes, billions of dollars were used to build iSight. And it was, I don't think anyone would call it a success in its original form, but I think the end result is something that's useful.
Something rather than nothing. That's
exactly.
We'll end it there and say the lesson is, well, let's see. The something rather than nothing in government we'll all take as a win. Okay, because that doesn't always happen. But for the business owner, yeah, what's the takeaway? If you have a really aggressive, expensive project, what's the lesson for the business owner to make sure that it ends up with just something rather than achieving the vision?
I think I've heard that people are really, really sold on the what and the tactical and the thing they're building without looking at the strategic end result.
The why.
Exactly. And when you talk about strategic plans not being, 2 out of 3 of them fail, it could be because it's implementation or because there's not enough flexibility in the tactical of how to get to the end result. If you think about these giant companies, and Google's original vision, it's no longer the vision now, was do no evil. That was their vision. And everything that they did was related to that. And that's just, it's not a plan, but it's a vision and it's a strategy to get to that point. For businesses, if you, the royal you, know where you want to go, flexibility in getting there is probably a recipe for success versus sticking to a plan. I know Tassus, we update our business plan every month. We take a look at it and we see what's realistic and what's not, and then we adjust. So I think for businesses that are growing, that's something they should do as well.
Be flexible and have the why in mind the entire time, not just the what. I love it.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll end it there. Except for if anyone has any doubt at this point of your domain expertise in terms of understanding government contracting and how you can work with the government and how the government works, and you understanding all that. Tell me, I'm just looking at the seals behind you there. Can you tell us what those two seals are and who gave them to you and what agencies are they from? I think you've already mentioned probably the agencies, but
Absolutely. So the one right here is the National Intelligence Management Council. I was their chief of staff, which is equivalent to a chief admin officer. It was a close to $140 million, 200-person organization, and their job was to orchestrate intelligence across the intelligence community. This one here is the Directorate for Mission Integration at ODNI. I was their staff director, which is the chief operating officer equivalent. I ran HR, IT, facilities, security, policy. And the reason why these are back here is because as a government employee, back when I was doing this stuff, you don't get really nice gifts because that's not something we can use taxpayer dollars for legally. But having people sign very nice notes to you on a signboard means a lot because it's a personal touch. So I keep this behind me as a reminder.
Those are your government agency experience golden Rolexes.
Exactly.
Got it. Awesome. Mike, as always, fascinating. You and I have had the privilege of talking to, I've had the privilege of talking to you. I don't know if it's a privilege talking to me, but I've certainly had the privilege of talking to you a few times before this. And I look forward to having more conversations and working together here in the near future, I'm sure. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for your service to the government. I'm so glad we had guys like you at the helm there and are also helping civilians make sure that, that I don't know if we're getting the most out of government or vice versa, but I'm glad that you've still got some say in it.
I appreciate it, Josh. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you for the invitation.